Okay, hello. Warm greetings, everybody. My name is Rob Prince, and I'm here for the Center for Freedom and Justice, Colorado. This is the sixth in our series of live interviews with different people, mostly Palestinians, who can explain to us better the Palestinian narrative on events and politics, whatever. And today the interview is with Raghad Alafifi. Raghad, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
It's actually Raghad Alafifi, but you're doing a great job.
Oh, well, thank you. Not that great, but I'll do my best. Raghad, towards the end of May, there was an 11-day bombardment of Gaza by the Israeli government. 256 Palestinians were killed, among them 56 children. So we want to talk about that because you were there, and we want to hear your take, your experience on what happened there. But before that, could you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what your background is?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for having me in your show. It's a true honor to be here and speak my story. I am Raghad Alafifi. I'm 23. I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia, where my parents started their lives there as a refugee. But originally, I am from the village of Batani al-Gharbi in Palestine. And currently, I'm living in Gaza. My professional background, I come from an educational one and a business management. And I have been running my own startup for the past 3 years. I work as an English teacher for young teenagers, and as I run my startup on the side.
Okay, could you tell us a little bit? You've been involved in an educational project there in Gaza. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So the project that I run, which is my startup called Fill the Gap. Fill the Gap is a program for Palestinian students, college students. It is to support them to take the most out of their university experience and also allow them the opportunities and the horizons that are not allowed, mostly because of the blockade here or like the limited resources that our universities are running on. So the educational experience is a little bit limited. Actually, it's a lot more limited for Palestinian students, especially in Gaza. And in that, in our program, we are trying to fill in that gap in the education.
Okay, when you say that you're trying to help students make the best of their educational experience, can you tell us a little bit more about what that might be?
Sure. So, as everyone knows, or like, Gaza is living under blockade, and that blockade affects every aspect of life, in terms of travel, health, and education. And when I say education, it means that a lot of our universities are not equipped to have research, because these equipments that are needed in labs are not allowed to enter Gaza. And much of the opportunities that are allowed for international students or students generally are not allowed here in Gaza because of the occupation and so. And thus it creates a very limited experience for the students. What's the usual case here is that students go to universities, take their lectures, study the curriculum from their books, and then take their finals. There are not much opportunity to take their theoretical knowledge into practice because there are no labs, and the opportunities also in the market is really low. Oh. And when they graduate, their skills are really not that much great or like employable, let's say.
So the fact that they can't make these international exchanges, which is really key to any kind of scientific or social scientific program. This really limits their learning experience.
Exactly.
Another consequence of occupation. And
Yes.
yes. Okay. Go on, please. Excuse me.
Yeah. So what we do is, in a way, and in all the ways possible, is support them in their journeys and reaching their goals. A lot of our students want to start their own startups, but there's not much entrepreneurial education in Gaza or Palestine in general. And there's also the high unemployment rate that reaches up to 70% among people in Gaza. And so the competition on the positions that are open is really high. And it's either you get that position, which like really limited positions open, or then you get unemployed. And so we work with our students in order for them to be strong enough to compete in international and remote, let's say, remote job openings that are open for international people. Another thing is that we do to support our students is get to these research labs that they want. Of course, these are not available here, so it's going to mean getting a scholarship or an internship abroad, and these are really hard to get. So we work thoroughly with our students in order for them to be great candidates, and then get these opportunities. And sometimes, if these opportunities are not funded, we help them in getting the funding needed. To reach these places and take these internships and research opportunities.
So what's the name of this project once again?
Yeah, it's called Fill the Gap.
Fill the Gap. And is there a website or a Facebook page or anything like that?
Yeah, on Facebook we're called Fill the Gap Program, and we are building our website. It's called fillthegap.mystrikingly.com.
Okay, well, it certainly sounds like in a difficult situation where life is being made pretty much close to unlivable, that this kind of project is just the opposite. Gives opportunity, some hope, and wish you very well on this project, and hope that some of our listeners can follow up and learn more about it. Having said that, you were in Gaza during the recent fighting, the Israeli bombing of Gaza and the Palestinian response. Now, a few months later, what are your main impressions of that episode? What was it like living through that episode?
Well, I must say, and as it sounds, it's been a really horrible experience to go through. And having lived through 3 wars previously, I must say that the last one has been the most terrifying one among them all. And it was not, I was like, everyone that came out alive from that war, I feel very lucky. And at the same time, we're very fearful for what is coming next. And it makes us feel like the general state right now in Gaza is like we're all fearful and anxious about what is coming next. Is there going to be a second war or like a fifth war coming in? Especially that we are right now in holy days for the Muslim people, and there has been clashes and storming in Al-Aqsa Mosque happening since this morning and even yesterday. And this is exactly how it started, like the previous war, the 11th date. We were in the month of Ramadan, the holidays for Muslims, and
this is in May you were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest site for Muslims, and a lot of Muslims go to worship God and pray there. but unfortunately, there were settlers that wanted to break in, and they have, which caused a lot of clashes happening, and then things escalated on the Gaza side, and that war started.
Yeah, this was a war, even though a lot of it was fought in Gaza, about Jerusalem, wasn't it?
Yes.
And about the ally. All right, we can come back to that. But what neighborhood, in generically speaking, in Gaza were you a part of, and did it suffer damage too?
Yeah. So I live on the western side of Gaza, like near the beach, called neighborhood of Tel El Hawa, and I would say we have experienced much of the war. Like other neighborhoods were a little bit more, like a tiny bit, were a little bit quieter or something like that, but it was not safe anywhere in Gaza. There had been a lot of targeting happened where I live, and in one instance, like there was this morning, like super early morning, it was 5 a.m. I was awake, and everyone, like, so basically during these days, no Palestinian in Gaza gets to get much sleep, so most of the time we're awake. So I was awake, and for the first time, I think it was the sixth day of the war, and for the first time I stepped away from my family. We usually sit in the center of the home where we think it's safest, because there we are very much away from the windows, and so if any bombing happens near our home, the glass scattered and shrapnels will not get to us. And on that morning, it was the first time for me to, to go to my room, and I wanted to prepare myself. I was going to talk with a friend in the U.S., and I was trying to prepare myself for that video conversation, and then I started to hear these really loud explosions and bombings that happened. They were in my neighborhood, and they were like repeated each after. I think the number that I counted was around 20 bombs that were dropped, and they were dropped like one after the other, and in patches. So they were like 6 and another, and then a different 6, and then the remaining 8. And the way that they targeted, it was around the neighborhood, like kind of like surrounding the neighborhood. And the bombs, they were saying that, like, people here were saying that how we heard it was a bombing, and then you hear it one, and then you hear the second one, and each one gets louder. And when it gets louder, you feel like it's coming closer to you, and you're coming, and that's your life being taken next. And
there's a whole psychological effect of the way these bombs land. Can you tell us what was hit in the neighborhood? Were they strategic targets of military value or not, from what you could tell? Why this neighborhood? Why targeted in this way?
Yeah. So, like, after the bombing happened and the war ended, we were able to come out of our houses. I went around the neighborhood and saw what was bombed, and it was basically the streets. It was literally holes in the streets from the beginning to the end, and that was it. I didn't see any damage. It was like, as you said, it was as if these bombs were dropped for the psychological aspect of it.
All right, so these weren't, if you like, strategic military targets, but they were carefully placed, so to speak. Supposedly, they're quite accurate. And given what you've just described, it sounds like the main purpose of such bombings, since it's not to destroy a military target, was to create fear, somewhere between fear and panic
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in my neighborhood, what was damaged, it was a house for civilians. And then there was bombings that I saw. It was near the UN headquarters, which is supposed to be an internationally protected area. And another building that was really damaged. But anything that I would say military, no.
Mm-hmm.
It was houses of civilian people and the street. That was it.
All right, and it's well known that, given their surveillance expertise and all that, the Israelis know exactly what's in this neighborhood and what isn't, and that kind of stuff. All right, let me ask you: are you there with your family members? What was your more immediate circumstance? You live by yourself with your family? What kind of people live in the building? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So in our culture, usually kids do not reach to a certain age and then leave the house to live alone. So I'm living with my family. I have my mom and two younger siblings with me, living in the same house. And I would say that in a way, it's not like, even if people want to think of it to live alone independently from their families, Gaza is highly populated. It's under blockade. It's 360 kilometers square with over 2 million people living there. So there is not much space and housing available for people to think of getting independent and living alone from their families.
Yeah.
And
it's not much bigger than the Denver metropolitan area, from what I can tell. It's all these people. It's so crowded. Yes. Well, let me ask you another question. All indications are that the blockade against Gaza continues, and that there have been no efforts to ease or lift it by either party, either the Israelis or Egyptians. Is that what people in Gaza are seeing, or did they see hope that the blockade will be lifted in the near future?
There's always hope for the blockade to be lifted, and there's always, effort dedicated to that. But we're not much seeing it. I have recently traveled to Egypt and came back to Gaza, and honestly, the border situation is the worst that it has ever been.
What do you mean by that when you say it's the worst?
Yeah. So the border is open. It's for people to travel, but it's not easy to travel through that. I personally spent 3 days in the street just trying to get through these multiple checkpoints where they check our luggage and see what we're holding in there, what we carry with us, and check our backgrounds. And most of these 3 days that I spent were just waiting. I was just waiting for that checkpoint to be open and go have my luggage and myself checked and then pass through it. And so I don't know if the blockade is going to be lifted soon, but what I can tell right now is that the situation has never been worse.
Just the human living situation in Gaza is just never been, to use your words, it's never been worse. One question about this last round of fighting, which I know you've just described how awful it was, and now that it's over, from a personal perspective, do you see the situation of the Palestinian people stronger? Is it weaker? Is it the same? Are the hopes that this issue, the end of the occupation is anywhere near, or is just no difference as far as you can see?
Yeah. So after this last round, I would say that the situation of Palestinian has become stronger globally because there's the social media and the people of Palestine who spoke much about what's going on and in a way expose these war crimes that are happening. And I would say there's a lot of awareness that has happened, and a lot of people are seeing the truth. And so we are hopeful that the occupation would end. But personally, I would say it would become like when the people are more aware, they are more powerful to pressure their governments, and then that would get the UN or the global community to push towards ending this discrimination that's happening on daily basis against Palestinians. I mean, this last round ended. Like, we are very much hopeful, but at the same time, this last round ended, and the reason that it started is right now being repeated. So, as I said, it was mostly for Al-Aqsa Mosque and what is happening there, but then at the same time, there are a lot of other activities and discriminative actions and policies that are happening and being implemented against Palestinians in all Palestine, like in the West Bank and the occupied territories of the 48 lands, and in Jerusalem, and especially in Gaza as well. And these things have not been eased. These discriminative actions did not stop. And so I would say that we are hopeful and we want this to end, but at the same time, there's not much happening from the Israeli side for this to end.
You know, what I noticed about it is it's like Palestine is back in the world news after after it wasn't becoming less and less noticeable unless you know, in a specialized circle that follows this this stuff. And here in the United States, but from what I could tell elsewhere in the world, including here in Denver, Colorado, where I'm interviewing from, the support, the solidarity for the Palestinian people has never been greater. The size of the demonstrations, the spirit of the demonstrations, the makeup of the demonstrations in terms of different elements of the community coming together. And so, you know, without a big analysis or whatever, it just seemed to me that in spite of the awfulness of war and what was experienced there, that the Palestinian cause got a boost. Again, it's just an impersonal impression in a good way. And right, you see it in that way. Well, were you aware in Gaza of all the support demonstrations that were taking place all over the world? Do they have any influence on people?
Yes, absolutely. We were very much aware, and by that we were aware of what's going on, and by that we also realized the responsibilities that we have to get the word out and continue to speak about what is going on here. We have realized that the media is not going to help, and governments are not helping much at that time. So there was this kind of pressure to live through the war, at the same time also speak about it. We were fearful for our lives, and at the same time we really needed to get the word out. So
very nice.
Yeah. So
that mixed feelings. I don't know how anybody in those situations couldn't be afraid, couldn't feel fear for themselves, or, you know, you get to be my age, and it's. I'm not saying I'm fearless, because I'm not, but it's more about your family, your friends, you know, but you're afraid, you worry. And in spite of that, you have to do your social responsibility, don't you?
You have to continue speaking,
Yeah. And that's really something that in the midst of all that, rather than people just thinking of themselves in Gaza, people think of each other. It's quite moving. We need to learn from that. There's something else about this that just, again, I'm thinking long view of someone who's tried anyhow to study the issue over time. But the incredible resilience of the Palestinian people to come back again, and again, whether it's from this bombing or past bombings, or going back, as far as you want, in terms of this conflict. Um, uh, can you enlighten us a little bit? How can the Palestinians be so resilient? They're more resilient than their supporters out here.
Yeah.
Beyond.
I would say we can be taken as an example for high resilience. Um, it is basically coming from our belief that we are on the right side, and that this is our land, like we want to be back. And that at the same time, Palestinians are living through torture on a daily basis, whether they're living as refugees abroad, in the airports and every border there is. Palestinians are being treated differently, and in Gaza they're under blockade, and then the other parts of Palestine, the occupied territories of the 48, they're living under discrimination as second-class citizens of Israel. And also the people in the West Bank. There are multiple checkpoints for them to go through on daily basis just to get to work or to school. And there's also the discriminative wall that is built across Palestine, that's really affecting our lives. A lot of people can't get past to their lands of their farmers and can't get past that border, that wall to get to their jobs. And a lot of families has been separated. They can't reach
Yes.
and go see their families. And personally, I have family in Jerusalem that I only got to see once in my life, and that was and the time that I got that one time that I got the permit to pass that checkpoint, the Ares checkpoint, was by U.S. assistance. It was the U.S. consulate that coordinated and got, got got myself and another group permits to go take a training there in Jerusalem, and it was for one day,
Oh,
and it was like, can you imagine? I got a permit to get a training, but I
wow.
went to see my family. I couldn't see that.
Uh,
And yeah, so it's like we're not living as normal people are. So we want to have that life. We see a lot how the world is
right.
living, and we want to live saying that without hardship, without these struggles, without these daily challenges. And we know that going back to our home, to our lands, then that is going to grant us that life. So that is why we stay resilient. We want to
That's a
live
great,
normally.
great, great explanation.
Mm.
That's one thing that hardship does create, is a kind of a toughness of spirit and of purpose, particularly when you have justice on your side, and you, that's a very moving force. I wanted to ask you just generally. There's a new government in Israel, uh, or at least a new prime minister. Maybe we should put it that way. And does this government, for people in Gaza, yourself, again, personal take on all this, does it represent any change in Israeli policies towards the Palestinian people that you can tell? I guess I'm looking for little indications that might be hopeful, but I'm trying to be objective about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, what affects Palestinians around the new government or the new prime minister of Israel is how is he going to deal with the situation? How is he going to think of the Palestinian cause? Is he an extreme right, or is he on the left wing? And then um, this is like here in Gaza, in a way, like we have gotten used to the political changes in Israel. So when there are elections or something new happening, we are anticipating something bad happening in Gaza, because they brag about how much, it's really hard to say, but it's
Yes.
it's a source of pride for them when they
The
are
arrogance of power.
mostly violent
Right.
against
Yes.
Palestinians. So
Okay.
we're a bit fearful from
Yes.
how it's going to be for us.
Well, looking at it from here, just very briefly, many people, myself included, were pleased to see that Benjamin Netanyahu was finally removed from office, given his record towards the Palestinians and the whole region. But the more that you kind of scratch the surface, what's this new government like? When it comes to their views on Palestine, it just doesn't look like there's much, if any, change at all. Again, this initial impression, but it doesn't look really hopeful. I wanted to kind of conclude with a. I don't know if you're in a position to answer this question, and if you're not, it's all right. But I'm wondering how you view U.S. policy towards the Palestinians, and if you've seen any positive changes in that policy over the last years. Is there? We know what Israeli policy has been. We don't need to go through that, and how one-sided its support for Israel has been, all the funding and aid. So again, sitting in Gaza as the bombs are falling around your neighborhood, and I assume that some of those bombs were made in USA. Do you see in this our new government, the Biden government, which is just taken off, any more hopeful signs than there were under the 4 painful years of the Donald Trump presidency here?
For me personally, I really hope that the Biden administration would take a different approach from the Trumps. So far, we haven't seen very much difference, but I would say there has been 2 contradictory actions from the Biden administration. One is supporting the Israeli army by, I guess the number was $3.7 billion, or was it million? And the other one was the pressure and the work of the congressmen and women during this past war that got the Biden administration to push Israel to stop this war against
That's
Gaza.
true. Yes, that's a new element. And yeah, there's some legislation now. The bills of Betty McCullen, a congresswoman from Minnesota, calling for not necessarily a cut, but a reevaluation of U.S. aid to Israel based on how it's treated the Palestinians. And I think there's another bill that was introduced by Bernie Sanders in the Senate, and as they call her, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of the neighborhood I grew up in New York City, that was calling for a cut in military, the latest military aid that the United States was offering. So yeah, those things are unprecedented. All right. Well, listen. At this point, first of all, I want to thank you very much for having shared your experience with us, and through our program, hopefully with many of our listeners. And at this point, Sergio, is there a way for you to come on and you can ask some of these questions that I see on the side? I try not to look at those questions because they divert me, and so I haven't really studied them. So I'll turn it over to you right now.
Very good. Thanks, Rob.
Sergio Atala from Center for Freedom and Justice, Colorado. Okay.
Thank you, Rob. And yeah, we have a few questions that came up as you were talking. I think a lot of them circle around the blockade or separation policy that has been going on since, I guess, since the fence was built up. And I think that's in 1995. Is that correct? That Gaza was essentially separated from the West Bank and from Israel. I mean, not from the West Bank, but from Israel. And there has been an escalation in this separation. It went from the fence to the disengagement plan in 2005, where Israel removed the settlers. There were like 10,000 settlers. And every time that there has been a change of policy like that, for example, the Hamas takeover, there's been an increase in the restrictions that have occurred in the flow of goods and people from Gaza to the West Bank. And so one of the questions is how does this affect the relationship of the people in Gaza to the rest of the Palestinian population?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And to be honest, it makes a huge difference. And it feels like Gaza has become an independent existence from the rest of Palestinian territories. It's really difficult to build relations or start projects with the Palestinians from the West Bank or other parts of Palestine and with the Gazan side. So mostly when you hear about projects that are happening in Palestine, it means that they are operating separately in Gaza and operating separately in the West Bank. And with minimal administration and coordination, they are said to be as happening in Palestine. And that is, of course, because there's not much movement happening, or like almost not at all movement happening from the West Bank to Gaza and from Gaza to the West.
Raghad, I'd like to just jump in here for a moment. During this war, the sense that comes through is that for at least a moment, that these divisions, this kind of divide and conquer thing between Gaza, the West Bank, Palestinians living within the 67 territories, and even those in the camps, that for one moment they came together in a way that was really we haven't seen for a very long time. Is that propaganda, or did that really happen?
Yes, it definitely happened, and we all sensed it. Every Palestinian around the world felt that. That happened because the Israelis were coming in contact with one of the very most sensitive part of our issues is Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so a lot of, and then, as I said, there's discrimination happening against every Palestinian around the world. And so when the attacks happened in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the people of Jerusalem were forced to leave their houses, it was like, I would say, like the button that was pushed to get all that anger out.
Jerusalem is really, we mentioned it earlier, but I don't know that people appreciate it, that this was a conflict, a war, an exchange, whatever you want to call it, about Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And Jerusalem, again, sitting in Denver, so I'm a long ways away. But my impression was it's Jerusalem. And Jerusalem also, and we must add, the symbol of Islam in Jerusalem, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is not just momentarily united the Palestinian people, but the entire Arab world and beyond. Is that, again, you say things like that, it sounds exaggerated, but that was the impression that I had about this, that this was this was another, if you like, tit for tat with the Palestinians doing their minor damage and Israel, bombing like crazy. But this is not. This war was a little. This exchange was different, and it shows the unifying possibilities of Jerusalem. And anyhow, that's what comes through, and it comes through in your remarks too. I just want to underline it.
Yeah, if you ask every Palestinian, like I don't want to exaggerate and say every, but if you ask most Palestinians around the world, what are your 3 top wishes? One would be going to Jerusalem, and the second would be praying in Al-Aqsa Mosque. So these 2 places, they're not like we don't even hesitate when we say they're very sacred and they are red lines we can't cross for Palestinians.
Sergio, we got 1 or 2 more questions so we can.
Yeah, actually, there is one pertaining to that issue. In regards to this policy that's being carried on where Gaza is being isolated, it seems that it is giving, let's say, an ample opportunity for Israel to annex the West Bank and essentially isolate the Gazans to the point where now people have this perception that the Palestinians are not in Gaza, they're in the West Bank. Is that felt from the population in Gaza that they're being purposely isolated and becoming a separate entity from the Palestinians?
I wouldn't say from the Palestinians, but we have noticed these actions around the political platform. A lot of politics and politicians right now talk about Gaza as if it's a separate entity from Palestine, as if it's, I would say, like a country on its own. And the annexation plan, in a way, says that Gaza is going to be separate, and it's not going to be reconnected to the other parts, especially the West Bank. And there has been a lot of Israeli efforts to separate the 2 communities, the West Bank community and the Gaza community, in a way to make that bond between Palestinians fragile and make it less strong. And so when you are dealing with, I would say, I don't want to say an enemy, but when you're dealing with an opposite side which is not united, it's very obvious. It's very easy to take down that opponent. And this has been trying to be made and created here in Palestine, where they're trying to separate Gaza from and even like the Palestinians in the occupied territories of the 48 lands. They are, in a way, also treated as a separate community from the West Bank community and from the Gazan community. Not to mention that most of the time, refugees abroad Palestine, they're not even they're disregarded most of the time. Yeah. So
there's another question here on what is the perception of the enemy? Are the Jews the enemy?
No, not at all. Jews are not they're not enemies, and they're not our enemy. There are a lot of Palestinian Jews, and our fight is not with the Jewish people. It's not. I've seen a lot of Jewish Palestinian people who fight on the Palestinian side, and a lot of Jewish people who are not Palestinians also fighting on the side of Palestinians. And I think a lot of the demonstration that happened abroad in the U.S. and Europe, a lot of them had Jewish people involved, and I have Jewish friends. And they're very much supportive for the Palestinian cause. Our fight is not with the Jews. It's not at all.
It's especially true what you're saying, Raghad, about young Jewish people. that are not swallowing the narratives that were so strong like when I was growing up and in the past. I say this as someone who taught in higher education in Colorado for half a century or close, and I'm really it just came through again and again from my Jewish students how their attitudes had changed. They don't buy the narrative that was so powerful, if you like, and so that's where I see the hope for Judaism, to be quite frank, and the future is in this trend. The young people who are thinking for themselves, and a lot of their sympathy from, again, this is anecdotal, but their utter horror for what's happened in Gaza. Not just this recent bombing, but the whole situation of Gaza, kind of an armed concentration camp. Gaza has made a deep impression on young Jews, and it just flies in the face of everything that, or so much of what they were told that Israel was about. So you're right.
There's a question here on tunnels, and I was wondering if you could comment on that. How did I mean, obviously there's a blockade, and goods and people are totally prevented from accessing other markets. Obviously, there's going to be tunnels, but what is your experience with the existence of the tunnels in Gaza?
Mm-hmm. I have personally not seen any tunnel in Gaza. And to elaborate, after the past war ended, I was accompanying Italian press, translating from Arabic to English to them, just to facilitate. And we have been through multiple targeted places that was destroyed during the war. And I've seen the rubble, I've seen the destroyed houses. Nothing was indicating that there was a tunnel there. And it's all the places that I went through were houses, like houses of civilians, and they were victims of innocent people.
Have you been personally affected by the bombing, or your family?
We talked about that.
Fortunately, we have not. Yeah.
Because I know that we had a conversation on the war in 2009. How
Yeah,
did that affect you?
on the war of 2009. On that war, there was legally prohibited weapons that were used. It was the white phosphor.
White phosphorus, yes.
Yes, that attacks with oxygen and flares immediately, and it was heavily, fired on Gaza. A year after that, like around a year or less, my dad was diagnosed with lung cancer, and after that war, particularly the number of people who were diagnosed with cancer increased in a radical way, and my dad was one of them. And when you're asking where is the father, like as I said, I live with my mom and two younger siblings. I lost my father in 2012. We went through therapy for a year, lived with one lung basically, and it was difficult to diagnose because the medical and the health sector in Palestine is not highly equipped. It's not advanced at all. It merely how can I say it? It's merely adequate for running small operations, and it's really difficult to diagnose these diseases. And so it was, when he got diagnosed, it was a fourth stage where it got spread all around his body. He was resilient and he was strong and continued fighting for his life for a year. But with minimal medical support. He got an operation in Jerusalem. He got to be able to get a permit to pass the area's checkpoint and go to a hospital, a more advanced hospital in Jerusalem, and have his operation there, and then a follow-up. But eventually, it got the disease became too strong for him, and we lost him in the year 2000.
Sergio, maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap this.
Yeah. Is there any questions that perhaps you wish would be asked, or perhaps that you
right? Is there anything you want to add to your commentary? Your very interesting commentary.
Was that a question? I couldn't hear.
Yeah, we're wondering whether there's a question that you wish perhaps that it would be asked that you'd like to mention.
I think I gave a clear answer, but I'm really hoping that people educate themselves and seek the truth and not believe whatever that's put there for them to have. No questions that on my mind. I think the question I made the situation clear, and that's like what I have.
Well, then look, Raghad Alafifi, we'll really want to thank you for this interview and for sharing your experience. It's hard to ask people what's it like being in a war. I really don't like to ask that kind of a question, but it's important here in the United States to hear your voice, and we appreciate you having shared your thoughts and your experiences with us. Could you tell us one last time about your initiative, your project, before we go, and how people might get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I would like to thank you for allowing me the opportunity and the platform to speak my story. You can reach out to us with the program on Facebook with Fill the Gap program.
Fill the Gap. Fill the Gap.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's our Facebook page, and you can contact us on my email. Is that okay to share my email?
It's absolutely fine. Yeah. Maybe what you could do is can you put it in the chat? Do you know how to do that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, I don't, but I hope you do. Okay, good. All right. I'll wait for it to get up there. Actually, what's all this nonsense on my computer? All right. There it is. Okay. So for those of you that are watching now or in the future, it's there. And again, thank you. And we'll try to keep in touch. And needless to say, we wish you and the Palestinian people, the resilient Palestinian people, the very best, and know that there are people in this country that care a lot. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Take care. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.